not come into this country and hurt Americans and be a gang member and come in illegally and think that you will not be held accountable.
Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that the force will stop there.
I understand the decision that many of my Democratic colleagues made, but I think the American people want us to take risks right now in order to save our democracy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, constitutional tension. A federal judge is holding a late-day hearing in Washington on the Trump administration's use of the 18th Century Alien Enemies Act. Despite being blocked by the courts, the White House appeared to have defied a ruling and used the act to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members, sending them to El Salvador. Now, that act has only been used 3 times during the War of 1812 and both world wars. Also, ceasefire talks. President Trump is preparing to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone tomorrow. There's a push for a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. I'm sure you've heard about that. And negotiators are working to end that war. They say in the context of their conversations, there have already been discussions about, quote, dividing up certain assets, unquote. President takes center stage. Well, sort of. President Trump meets with the Kennedy Center's Board of Trustees. Mr. Trump's takeover of that storied arts institution has seen a sizable leadership shakeup. Many have been purged. And it's also led to many shows at the Kennedy Center being canceled. I want to start tonight with Jake Rosen and Camila Montoya Galvez. Jake is with me here in Washington. Camilo is in New York. Camila, let me start with you. What do we know about the status of these deportations and the legal authority being asserted by the Trump administration to carry them out?
Well, Major, on Friday, the president invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. The White House published the order officially on Saturday, and it allows the government to essentially summarily arrest, detain, and deport any Venezuelan national who is in the U.S. without citizenship or green card status, older than 13, who is alleged to be a member of the Tren de Aragua transnational criminal gang. And that order allows officials to summarily deport any of the people who meet this criteria without any of the due process protections in U.S. law. And that is what happened over the weekend. 137 Venezuelans, allegedly gang members and part of this Tren de Aragua criminal gang, from Venezuela, were deported to El Salvador, which has agreed to detain and house some of these deportees. There were other migrants who were also deported under different authorities to that Central American country. But of course, the legal question now is whether the White House and the administration overall complied with the court ruling that barred deportations under this 18th century statute, and whether the White House made a decision to actively defy that order and not turn around planes that the judge said should be returning to the U.S. in light of his order.
And Camila, on this question of criterion, did the administration or has it produced evidence for any of these deported Venezuelans to prove or underscore or highlight their direct connections to this transnational organization?
No, and the answer to your question is that they don't really have to, Major, because under this statute, a simple finding from officials that somebody is allegedly a member of this gang that the administration is arguing is orchestrating and staging an invasion or an incursion into the U.S. is enough to justify their summary arrest, detention, and deportation. There is no criminal charge or immigration finding that is needed to carry out an arrest and deportation under the statute.
Jake, catch us up. What's going on today in court?
Well, that's right. The court hearing has started, but within the last hour, the Department of Justice moved to dismiss this hearing and vacate it, claiming that the judge has no jurisdiction in this case and that they have abided by the order. And as you just heard Camilo lay out, that flights have left, but they also argue that the judge's order, which was verbally spoken on Saturday evening, that the planes had to turn around because it was not put officially into writing, that the government believes that it is still following that order. However, in numerous cases in the last a couple of months since Donald Trump has taken office, judges have sided verbally with the Trump administration, and the Trump administration has seen that as fact of law in a court. And so we've really seen a double standard there. As a result of the judge declining to vacate that hearing, the Department of Justice and Trump administration moved in an appeal to remove this judge, Judge James Boasberg, from this case, saying that he overreached his judicial authority and had proceeded improperly on Saturday evening by not letting the government officially file court documents in the case and by blocking what they see a national security imperative by the president.
Jake, I want to play you some sound from the president about this from Sunday aboard Air Force One. Let's listen.
They invaded our country. So this isn't, in that sense, this is war. In many respects, it's more dangerous than war because, you know, in war, they have uniforms. You know who you're shooting at. You know who you're going after. These are people that came out. They're walking our streets.
The reason the president talked about war is the three previous instances I mentioned in which this Enemy Aliens Act has been invoked, Congress declared war. There is no declaration of war. The administration is rhetorically asserting these Venezuelans came here to this country, and that was, in effect, an act of war. Do I have that right, Jake?
Yes, that's correct. And on Saturday evening, a Department of Justice attorney argued that because the Venezuelan government at times cooperates with the Tren de Agua gang, that they are basically a part terrorist state, and that the Venezuelan government should be considered basically an opponent of the United States because of their cooperation with this gang, basically saying that by Donald Trump's Article 2 powers, which has been really the case for a number of these executive actions, that Donald Trump can assert that the Venezuelan government is cooperating with this gang, and by thus using this act that really, as you said, has only been used 3 times, and that he has the power to do it further, and that this judge has no way of stopping him because he has Article 2 power that allegedly, they believe, assert this claim.
Jake Rosen, Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you for getting us started. Appreciate it. Finn Gomez joins me now here at the desk. Finn, of course, is our esteemed political director, and he has many other exalted titles. Finn, there's another issue that has cropped up due to a social media post from the president over this weekend declaring essentially null and void, vacant and of no further force or effect, pardons issued by President Biden near the end of his term for several people related to January 6th. Where does this stand?
Well, first of all, Major.
And by the way, happy St. Patrick's Day. You see Finn and I are properly attired, color coordinated. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone.
As my people say, Aaron Gobrag, Major Garrett.
As your people, yes, indeed.
That's right. Vino Gomez, of course. No, like, first of all, Major, on this topic, there's never been a revocation of a pardon. One.
Period, in American history.
No. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution grants presidents broad clemency powers when it comes to this. And
the term of art legally is plenary powers.
Exactly. And a pardon only needs to be accepted by its subject to take effect, right? Flat out. Let's start there, right? Okay, so with what the president posted and what he said on Air Force One overnight, to me, it stems more of, and what the White House has said, and what the White House said today, Caroline Leavitt was asked about this today at the White House briefing. She said that it was the president begging the question that more journalists should be asking about President Biden's cognitive
state of mind.
Yeah, state of mind when he signed this, not about the auto pen, right? So let's go to that. Again, Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff, was asked the same question. He said it was about, was he mentally aware of when he signed it? You know, but when you actually go back to the pardon, it's simply there's really no constitutional basis to reverse it at this point, right?
And there is no ongoing legal controversy about an auto pen having anything to do with either legislation or pardons. Do I have that correct?
Absolutely right. I mean, if we go back through history, I know you're a big fan of history.
I like
the CBS News is historian, Major Garrett. But if you go back, let's go back. We know that as far back as President Truman, presidents have been using the auto pen, right? Primarily for constitutional letters, that sort of thing, right? We go back to 2011. President Obama used it to extend the Patriot Act. He was at the G8 summit in France, right? And there was a deadline. He had to do it. There were questions by congressional Republicans at the time, and his administration cited a memo from the Bush administration, and Alberto Gonzales, the Attorney General, you remember him well.
I do.
His office
vouching for the constitutionality, the legal permissibility of an auto pen.
That's absolutely right.
And that's where we are. To be continued. Finn Gomez, as always. Thank you, sir.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Indeed. Dividing up Ukraine's assets. President Trump's plan, such as it is, we don't know that much about it, as he gets set to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin about ending the war in Ukraine and much else. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. President Trump says he will hold Iran responsible for any future attacks that come from Houthi rebels based in Yemen. Now, Trump authorized strikes against the Tehran-backed group today and also over the weekend. Houthis, as you might know, have been attacking with varying degrees of effectiveness military and commercial ships in the Red Sea for quite some time. Remy Inocencio joins me now from Tel Aviv. Remy, catch us up on what has been happening in terms of these strikes and their effectiveness against Houthi targets in Yemen.
Major, yes, good to see you. The Houthis are saying that at least 53 people were killed in Yemen in those strikes. The Pentagon says that weapons manufacturing sites and weapons storage sites were destroyed and that several leaders of the Houthi drone program were killed. But the Houthis, they have not confirmed that. But what the group did say is that at least 5 of the dead were children, along with 2 women. And looking ahead, Major, we should expect more strikes to happen, both from the U.S. side and from the Houthis. This is based on statements from both. The Pentagon just held a press briefing the past couple hours. One of the words I noted that was used a fair bit was the word unrelenting in terms of more strikes. That word has been repeated by other administration officials, coming from Pete Hegseth himself, Defense Secretary. The stated goal here in the Red Sea is to keep freedom of navigation. Houthis say they're going to keep targeting U.S. ships if they keep getting attacked in. They say that they targeted the USS Harry S. Truman right now in Red Sea waters, the aircraft carrier group, strike group there, twice in 24 hours using missiles and drones. The U.S. so far, though, hasn't reported any damages.
Remy, I want to play for you sound from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who appeared on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan yesterday. Let's take a quick listen.
This is an effort to deny them the ability to continue to constrict and control shipping. And it's just not going to happen. We're not going to have these guys, these people with weapons able to tell us where our ships can go, where the ships of all the world can go, by the way. It's not just the U.S. We're doing the world a favor. Yeah. We're doing the entire world a favor by getting rid of these guys and their ability to strike global shipping.
Remy, the key phrase is getting rid of these guys. Is that possible simply with an air campaign? Because I've read numerous Israeli officials who have a vested interest in the outcome of whatever this conflict may or may not be, say on the record that the only way you're going to do that is to go into Yemen itself, on the ground.
Right. Right. And boots on the ground has been one of the topics of discussion at that Pentagon press briefing earlier. One journalist asked them, and they, perhaps no surprise, swerved around any topic pertaining to American boots on the ground, because that also begs the question of whether there will be an appetite from Americans who, at least seemingly, don't want to get into another war into the Middle East. But as for the Trump White House, it certainly appears to be doing its best to try to at least destroy as many of the group's weapons as possible and to generally degrade its command and control structure overall and its military capabilities overall. And, you know, we're seeing that from Secretary Rubio and in actions like the strikes over the weekend, and also, for example, the redesignation of the Houthis as a terror group, which then makes it harder, of course, to access the global financial network. But as for wiping out the Houthis in totality, that is a question that will require boots on the ground by many, many people, and again, whether Americans have an appetite for that.
Remy Inocencio, thank you very much. Appreciate it. President Trump is scheduled to speak with Russian leader Vladimir Putin tomorrow. That about the war in Ukraine and possibly ending it.
A lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
Daniel Free joins me now. He formerly served as the U.S. ambassador to Poland as former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. Dan, it's always great to have you at the table. Analyze this phone call tomorrow. Stakes involved for the United States, sense of anticipation in European capitals about what the president might or might not be willing to accept with the Russians.
All of the above. Mm-hmm. What I'm listening for is whether Putin continues his maximal demands. He's demanded that we recognize Russian territorial conquests. He's demanded that we give Russia a veto over Ukrainian security. Now, we should do none of those things.
Right.
If you
opposes any European troops in there to enforce any kind of ceasefire or settlement.
He opposes European troops. He opposes NATO membership. He opposes arms to Ukraine. He's basically, his terms for a ceasefire are Ukraine's surrender.
Right. Become a vassal state of Russia.
Putin has made no secret that that is exactly his aim. So is Putin going to insist on those maximal aims? Is he going to disguise them by being clever and sly? I've seen him do that. Or is he actually going to agree to the ceasefire or close to it, to be the benevolent peacemaker and get on Trump's good side? So the challenge for Trump will be to decide right on the spot how to react when Putin throws at him whatever he's going to throw at him. And the question is, will Trump push back hard the way he did successfully against Zelensky, or is he going to cave? And if you start caving to Putin, it never stops. So this will be a test, but not necessarily the end. You may not have a deal coming out of this, but that depends on what Putin offers and then what Trump is prepared to accept. I hope Trump pushes back.
How close attention should we pay to the two readouts of this phone call and how rapidly they occur after its end, meaning what the Russians say about it and what the White House says about it?
Well, it is certain that you can't trust the Kremlin readout, okay? Can we just stipulate that? I'm going to listen to it and then reverse engineer it. Like, okay, this is what they say. What do they really mean? The White House statements will be what the Europeans and what Americans should listen to.
Okay.
How they describe it, the language they use, what they say. And hopefully the president will not be Putin's fool. And Putin wants him to be the fool.
And administration officials have said if Vladimir Putin is trying to play President Trump, he's doing so at his peril.
Let's hope so. Now, this is possible. You want to outline an optimistic scenario? Putin overreaches because he's arrogant, and Trump knows that, he feels it, and he pushes back hard, as Trump can do.
Because there are some economic buttons that have not yet been pushed by the U.S. and by the Europeans that could be pushed if things really get ugly on this.
There are economic buttons. There's more we could do on hitting Russia's oil revenue, but there's also on the military side. Trump could say, I appreciate that the British and French are ready to help with Ukraine security. They've not asked for American boots on the ground. They've said that we help them out, we back them up. I think I'm inclined to do that, listening to Putin be unconstructive. I'm not saying that Trump will do that, but your question was, could he?
Could he? Right.
Does he have those
Listen
tools?
very carefully for those kind of things and indications. I want to ask you about something you've been writing about, which is Greenland. And what Greenlanders want, what their relationship with Denmark is, and what Trump may be trying to achieve, but could possibly achieve through not only more diplomatic ways, but more effective ways.
Well, that's exactly the point. The argument the vice president and that President Trump have made for our interest in Greenland is security. That you have the Russians, you have the Chinese, we have security interests. Fair enough. Oh, it's a completely legitimate issue. But everything we want to achieve, we could do so cheaper and better by working with the Danes. I was in Copenhagen a few weeks ago. If we asked them, they would say yes. There is already a U.S.-Denmark Defense of Greenland Agreement from 1951. It gives us extensive basing rights. Moreover, the Danes would help pay for it if we wanted to build another base. So what's the advantage of
jawboning them? Yeah.
What for? If we wanted a new Defense of Greenland Agreement, if there's anything wrong with this, I think they'd be willing to negotiate it. The fact is, we have not, to my knowledge, made any requests of the Danes. It's not that they've turned them down. They'd like to say yes.
Filed under, all you have to do is ask. Dan Fried, it's always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. What some are calling the president's, quote, chaos economy, unquote. How Mr. Trump's tariffs are impacting markets and creating a bit of anxiety about a possible recession. That's next. You're watching America Decides.
between now and April 2nd, there'll be some uncertainty, but as April comes along, markets will see that the reciprocal trade policy makes a great deal of sense.
Welcome back. That was the president's top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett. Now, despite the market, that is to say the stock market's instability, there's been quite a bit of volatility the last month. President Trump is standing firm on his promise of implementing reciprocal tariffs and maybe others, but certainly reciprocal tariffs early next month.
April 2nd is a liberating day for our country. We're going to be getting back some of the wealth that very, very foolish presidents gave away.
I want to bring in Washington Post economic columnist Heather Long. Heather, it's great to have you with us. You recently wrote that President Trump wants to have the economy in chaos. Why would he want to do that?
Well, it's kind of what he was saying in that clip you just played, and that is he truly believes that you can have a period of short-term pain for something that ends up better. He obviously calls it a golden age, says all these wonderful things are coming and we're all going to be richer than ever. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of holes in that argument. Number one being the pain can be very severe, and April 2nd is likely to be a day that all of these tariffs go into place, prices start to rise, and of course, other countries retaliate against us. And I think the bigger question in a lot of Americans' minds is, what's the end game look like? He keeps talking about wanting to re-industrialize the United States of America. Right now, manufacturing is about 10% of our economy and less than 10% of the jobs that employ people on a day-to-day basis. How much higher can that realistically go? And it sure would take years to build a lot of factories.
Now, as we talk on this day, Heather, the Dow is up. S&P is up, NASDAQ is up 2 days in a row. But as you know, and I just want to communicate to the audience, in the past month, the Dow is down 5.5%, the NASDAQ down 7.5%, the S&P 6.7%. Do you think most, if not all, of that volatility is about the tariff issue or other underlying warning signs in the U.S. economy?
That's a great question. I would say it's a twofold answer. Tariffs certainly spooked a lot of people. You can see it in the polling, where Americans are very worried about prices rising. You can also see it among executives who say, look, if you just would raise the tariffs once, I wouldn't like it, but I could adjust to that. But this constant whiplash is really not what anyone was expecting. But I think the second reason that we've seen a pretty severe stock market sell-off, even into correction, is because there's a lot of nervousness that consumers and businesses are pulling back right now. Our economy depends on spending. And what are you seeing so far? You're seeing people cancel their vacations. You're seeing a huge spike in people worried that they're going to lose their job. And we're not just talking about federal government workers who are worried about Elon Musk and Doge coming in and taking their job. We just saw in the University of Michigan survey of consumers that the highest number of people are worried about unemployment rising in the next year since 2009. You and I remember that period. That was Great Recession. Those were very fearful times. So this fear is rising and people are beginning to cut back on their expenses.
Heather, what does Argentinian President Javier Milei have to do with all this?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I was surprised as I called around trying to ask, so why is the president doing this? Why is he willing to risk a recession? And quite a few of his economic advisors told me, look, the president is using the Argentina strategy. The Argentine president, Javier Milei, came into office. He made a ton of cuts to the government, tried to get inflation there under control, and basically triggered a recession for about 6 to 9 months in that country. But that recession is already over. It ended in Q3 of 2024. And now, they're hoping for better times tomorrow. And I think that's really influenced the White House, the Trump White House thinking here. Let's get the pain out early. Let's do the tariffs now, and they know that the tax cut package is coming later this year, and their hope is that they can use that to really reset heading into 2026 and ultimately heading into the midterm elections.
Heather, as you know, many Trump economic advisors say the tariffs will not only rebalance the industrialization of American jobs and workforce, it will provide revenue that can pay for tax cuts. But will those tariffs economically be more harmful to middle and lower class Americans than the tax cuts that might be extended or the new ones that might be introduced?
Yeah, this is the key question that I honestly think people need to think through. And I'm a numbers person. I've run the numbers. I've talked to the Tax Foundation. They've been running this analysis as well. That's a center-right group. And we're coming up with the same thing, which is the bottom 50% of Americans will almost certainly be worse off financially under this plan if it goes forward to the full extent. The reason is if all of these tariffs the president is talking about go into effect April 2nd, or let's say by April 22nd, he likes to phase things in, it's going to cost over $1,000 per American household. And the reality is the tax cut for the bottom half will not be that large in most cases.
Heather Long, Washington Post opinion columnist. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Schumer's security concerns. The Senate Minority Leader postpones a scheduled book tour. This as he faces backlash for voting with Republicans last week on their funding bill. Our reporter panel will tackle that and much more next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has postponed a scheduled book tour. It's going to begin this week due to what people close to that tour say are security concerns. This comes just days after Schumer faced opposition from within his own party for, at the last minute, supporting the Republican-drafted bill to avert a government shutdown. Let's listen.
He's absolutely wrong.
Senator Schumer sent out mixed signals.
Jeffries played it by the rules. He played the game the way it ought to be played, and somehow he got blindsided.
I want to bring in our political reporter panel, Daniela Diaz and Molly Ball. Daniela is a congressional reporter for Notice, remember, News of the U.S. Molly is a senior political correspondent at the Wall Street Journal. Daniela, I want to begin with you. I want to play some sound from Face the Nation. Debbie Dingell was there talking about this entire situation and what she hears back home. Let's listen.
Can Leader Jeffries actually maintain that kind of unity in the House?
He showed you that he could do it last week. And I can tell you that I don't think anybody has been home. If you're home, my town halls look like a Republican town hall. I'm not taking it personally. People are scared. They want to see us do something.
People are scared. They want to see us, Debbie Dingell means Democrats, by us, do something. You've written recently that this entire last week stepped on the messaging and the intent that House Democrats were going to begin to try to talk to their constituents about this recess week while they're back home.
Right. My colleagues at Notice and I learned that some progressive Democrats were planning to hold town halls in Republican districts this week in the hopes of being able to really spread that message against their Republican colleagues against these.
Say they're not going to have them maybe, but we will.
Exactly. The supposed cuts that they've been pushing, their messaging, as Molly and I were talking about behind the scenes, on Medicaid. Cuts that could come out of this budget bill. Now, what happened on Friday could overshadow everything about this, considering we just heard from Debbie Dingell, who said we held the line, we voted against this bill that would fund the government. We had leverage. That's really the key thing here. And then we saw Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer vote to advance that legislation to prevent a shutdown, going against what House Democrats and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, his New York colleague, did as well. So there's a lot of contrasting signals here within Democrats, a lot of rank-and-file Democrats incredibly upset by what happened, and this is only the beginning as they're continuing to come out against this.
And not sure how to proceed. Not sure how to put this all back together.
In fact, we were just watching Hakeem Jeffries do an interview on Pod Save America. It just came out 10 minutes ago where he was defending that he met with Leader Schumer over the weekend in Brooklyn. They're both New York Democrats. And then said, we're actually just discussing messaging on Medicaid, potential Medicaid cuts that Republicans doing, not anything having to do with government funding, not anything having to do with this mixed messaging that we're seeing from them.
And Molly, I want to talk to you about your most recent reporting, because as always, I find it fascinating. The velocity of the Trump administration has taken everyone a little bit aback here in Washington. But it is, as you've written, enthralling Trump supporters. They are elated, or in some manner close to that emotional reaction. Yet some anxiety about what it could mean midterm and in the future.
That's right. I think, we're in a very odd political dynamic right now where Republicans, despite some of the warning signals sort of under the radar, are broadly elated. They feel like they are doing what they were elected to do. They feel like the electorate gave them a mandate for change, including disruptive change, including far-reaching change, including change that, goes beyond the usual.
A little bit jarring, yeah.
The change that may be jarring, change that may cause the stock market to swoon a little bit. So they are still really on board with this agenda. And it's just such a cognitive dissonance when, in so many other places, particularly for Democrats, it feels like the world's on fire. It feels like the sky is falling. They are looking at, civil servants being fired from their jobs. They're looking at what they consider a potential constitutional crisis. They're
federal research in medicine and other things being cut back.
They're looking at the transatlantic alliance, which I think it's fair to say is in tatters at this point, and they really feel this sense of emergency. But it's clear from the the president's approval rating has declined a little bit.
A little bit.
But it is not the case that it has plummeted. It is not the case that the floor has fallen out, because so much of America
had a pretty
feels like he's doing what he promised.
Right track number, yeah. What the NBC and the CNN poll both had this weekend. Democrats either in the CNN poll 29%, NBC poll 27%. It's not really the springboard to jump off of, is it, Danielle?
Not really. And I mean, to speak to what Molly is saying, I mean, we're watching Republicans, Donald Trump, really have command over the party. I mean, he was the sole reason that government funding bill passed last week. He is truly holding on to all of the rank and file Republicans and has that power. We are not seeing that from Democratic leaders opposite of him. So it's really such a contrast that he's committed to what he's going to do, and then Democrats kind of fizzled out, not really sure what's next.
And Molly, to that point, Trump said, I'm for it. The Freedom Caucus said we're in line, and it passed.
That's right, and that's never happened before.
No.
So many of those, and I think that is at the root of the miscalculation that the Democrats made, because they've seen this movie before, and every single time there's a CR, and it needs Democratic votes to pass because the Freedom Caucus members pride themselves on never voting to fund the government that they argue is bloated. Now, they have an excuse. They say, oh, we trust, that Elon's going to cut it back, et cetera, et cetera. But what really is happening is that Donald Trump is a powerful unifying figure, and he can whip up the Republican base, and what they hear from their constituents, particularly in these deep red districts where they only ever have to worry about winning a primary, is you need to be on board with the president. You need to be doing what the president tells you to do. And I would say, to the credit of House Speaker Mike Johnson, he's taken a fair amount of flack for his approach to things, but he realizes this and he has instrumentalized it. He realizes that the only thing that brings his fractious party together is
the
President
word from
Trump.
the president, right.
And so he has gotten Trump to help him bring the party together, and it has been successful.
And with that cohesion, for the moment, has come clout, real clout on Capitol Hill.
It's a page from the Nancy Pelosi playbook.
Exactly. Yeah. Daniela Diaz, thank you very, very much. The White House, well, today, going green. The North Lawn fountain dyed an emerald hue to mark St. Patrick's Day. And that's not as complicated an operation as turning the entire Chicago River into green, but it's a nice effort. Patrick's Day tradition at the White House dates back to President Truman. The dyeing of the fountain was first started by President Obama. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. Well, welcome back. President Trump is dismantling Voice of America, otherwise known as VOA, and other government-funded news outlets. Instead of journalism, this video has been playing on VOA, asserting that it will be, quote, reliable and authoritative. All full-time employees and contractors with the broadcaster have been placed on leave, and the staff lost their access to headquarters over the weekend. Nancy Cordes joins me now. Nancy, it's great to see you. For the audience who may not be up to speed, what is VOA and these other associated news organizations funded by the federal government?
VOA has been in existence, Major, for 82 years. It started actually as a radio outlet during World War II, reporting behind enemy lines, later reporting behind the Iron Curtain. And its essential function is to cover the U.S. and cover the world for audiences abroad. Americans don't see it here in the U.S., but there are 360 million people who see VOA's reporting on a weekly basis. It's translated into 50 different languages, and it's essentially meant to export American democracy for people living in repressive countries. This might be the only non-propaganda version of the news that they see, telling the real story of what America is and what it isn't.
And it's journalistic. It's not state-run media.
No, it is not. It is funded by the federal government, about $270 million a year. But these are real reporters. Some are Americans. Some come from other countries here to the U.S. They report from Ukraine. They report from the war in the Middle East. They report from the White House. And the goal is to be non-biased and to essentially show the rest of the world how you cover the news when you're not being clamped down by an authoritarian regime.
You talked to Michael Abramowitz, who is the director of VOA, about some of these issues. Let's listen.
Right now, VOA is shuttered. And if it's off the air for weeks and weeks and weeks, I really fail to see how it will be reconstituted, and it could be a major, really self-inflicted blow to the national security interests of the United States.
Why is that?
Because it's an incredibly important tool for reaching, for basically combating Chinese, Russian, Iranian, disinformation, for telling the truth to people living under tyranny. If America pulls off the playing field and cedes it to our adversaries, then they're going to be telling the narratives that people around the world are going to be hearing, and that can't be good for America.
They're going to be hearing an anti-American message.
They're going to be hearing an anti-American narrative, and we need to fight that.
This is Michael Abramowitz's first interview. Well done, Nancy. I want to play some more of that conversation. Let's listen.
I think that VOA can help the president achieve his agenda, and I hope he'll give it a chance to do that. I'm not going to say that everyone at VOA is not perfect, but I really believe that at VOA, the journalists, by and large, if they have a bias, they hate totalitarianism, they hate tyranny, they hate authoritarianism. They are people who have fought bravely for freedom and for a free press in their own countries, and now they want to do it here in the United States.
Nancy, in the 45 seconds I have remaining with you, which I know is not justice enough, where is this heading? What does Michael fear?
It's a great question. We don't know what the future of VOA will be. The Trump administration has argued that VOA has been too critical of the commander-in-chief, so they have shuttered it for now. But you played that video where it says they will be coming back in some form. They will represent America. We just don't know what form that will take. So all these employees are really in limbo right now.
Nancy Cordes, great interview.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Putting his mark on the Kennedy Center, President Trump presides over the art venue's board meeting this afternoon and mulls more changes. We'll hear from a regular performer at the Kennedy Center. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. President Trump attended a board meeting at the Kennedy Center in Washington today. The meeting comes just about a month after Mr. Trump announced the termination of several board members at the Kennedy Center and then installed himself as chairman. Since that time, several artists and productions have canceled scheduled performances at the Kennedy Center. President Trump said today the center is, quote, in tremendous disrepair, and said he intends at some point in the future to work with lawmakers on Capitol Hill to change that.
I'm very disappointed when I look around. The bottom line, it has tremendous potential, and we'll work with Congress. I think it's important to save this structure in this building. I think maybe we close up some of the work that's been done and built because it was done terribly. It was done terribly.
Joseph Del Goose joins me now. He is an actor in the Kennedy Center's production of the interactive comedic play Sheer Madness, a play I've seen at least 3 times. Not 3 nights in a row, but over the many, many years I've been in D.C. Joseph, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Major.
When you hear the president talk like that about the Kennedy Center, is that your experience, that it's in disrepair, falling apart?
No, not at all. And my experience, I will say, is directly in the theater lab space, which is on the upper level of the theater, and it has recently had to undergo some extensive repairs due to some water damage that the theater had last fall that expanded into the Opera House. But there's extensive work being done. The building itself is old and constantly has systems that are being redone. I think they've put in for a new orchestral opera lift this year. So it certainly isn't some sort of dilapidated, disrepaired, ignored building by any means.
You perform all over the country. What does it mean when other audiences know that you work regularly at the Kennedy Center? What does that mean?
It's a wonderful feeling, and it does in the theatrical community. It holds some clout, honestly, because you're performing at this very premier venue in a major city and named after one of our great presidents. And so
it's not only nationally known; it's world renowned.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And I think, I do think that Sheer Madness is more nationally renowned than world renowned. Ultimately, like I consider myself kind of blue collar in the acting world, but it's a tremendous honor to be there.
What's going on there atmospherically with this takeover of the Kennedy Center by the Trump administration?
In my experience, though our show has not felt any, eyes watching, closely over us. I, for example, was asked by representatives of the producers that as we rewrite jokes and as we modify the show to keep up with current events, that we do not put material in there that has to do with the current administration or with Trump or J.D. Vance. Yeah. I've been in the show for about 5 years, and we've always been very careful about if we're making political jokes or satire, we keep it even on both sides of the aisle. And nowadays, it's let's keep it on no sides of the aisle.
No politics at all.
Yeah. So that we just stay
kind of hard to do in a highly politicized city like Washington, D.C., which it always has been.
Yeah, it's extremely hard to do.
Does it feel in any way constraining, suffocating? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Claustrophobic.
No, it's
artistically.
I believe that amongst my cast, I just simply observe a unease about not only about our work, but how we feel doing it. There are a lot of artists that have pulled their shows voluntarily. Our show is still there, and our production, again, does not seem to be drawing the ire of the administration. But we wonder what that might take, what it might take to trip that fuse.
And I want to make this clear: the advice or the counsel that you received in the cast about staying away from politics, that was an inference drawn, not a directive from the White House.
No, we have received no directives from the White House. I have not seen, I have not seen members of the administration with memos or phone calls. No, there's been nothing like that.
What do you think this moment requires? Because you just mentioned productions, artists have pulled out of the Kennedy Center. Is that the right way to go? Is that what this moment calls for? Or does that put the Kennedy Center collectively in more peril?
I think that's an extremely good question and a hard one to answer because as you hear Trump talking about, like he believes the Kennedy Center is in disrepair. He talks about it being irrelevant and trying to revitalize it in some way. I don't think that his claims about the Kennedy Center are true, that it is somehow this squandered opportunity. But I also, as these artists pull their acts in response to his takeover there, I honor them for standing up for that, and I also hope that people will still find good art at the Kennedy Center. I hope that there will be folks that want to share their work there and who can. And I just don't know if that will be the situation the more Trump continues to seemingly tighten his grip.
I mean, artistic expression is about making choices.
Yeah.
Where do you express it, and what do you associate your form of expression with? And some productions and artists just say, that's something I can't do currently.
Yeah. And for me, I've struggled with that about whether I'm doing the right thing by continuing to perform there and instead of walking off of my job, for example. I suppose I pick my battles in that way. Same way that the president picks his battles when he endorses Tesla on the White House lawn.
And this is a battle that not very many of us were anticipating, let's say, in December of last year. Joseph Delgoose, thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Major.
That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of American Science tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report, that starts right now.